We now come to the first Opposition Day motion on statutory sick pay and protection of workers, and I call Margaret Greenwood to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is an international crisis and one where countries need to learn from each other about what is working and what additional steps need to be taken. We also need to come together as a country to support each other as the severity of the crisis is becoming clearer. A Public Health England document estimates that the coronavirus epidemic in the UK will last until this time next year and could lead to almost 8 million people being hospitalised. The impact will be felt not just by those who become ill or have to self-isolate. This public health crisis has really exposed the fault lines in an economy in which insecure, low-paid work is so prevalent. In the budget last week, and again yesterday, the Chancellor announced measures to support business, but there was a glaring omission when it came to workers on low income and those who are unable to work. Public Health England warns that it is estimated that at least 10% of people in the UK will have a cough at any one time during the months of peak COVID-19 activity. The revised health advice is that anyone with a cough should self-isolate for at least 7 days and for 14 days if they live with other people. It is right that people should not go on working when they're not well, but the government's measures so far still leave many people facing a cruel choice between their health and financial hardship, and it's a choice which has impacts on the health of the people they come into contact with too. In response to the Leader of the Opposition questions, the Prime Minister said he would bring forward a package of measures relating to statutory sick pay. We really do need the details on that as a matter of urgency.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. To actually claim statutory sick pay, workers need to prove that they are earning a minimum of £118 per week. So does my honourable friend agree that rather than just regurgitating vacuous sound bites like whatever it takes, the government actually needs to bring the statutory sick pay levels to European levels from the current paltry £94.25 a week, which isn't enough to even feed one's family, and they need to extend it to all workers.
My friend makes a couple of really important points about the levels of pay and about the people that are able to access it, and I'll be coming on to those things in my speech. So 7 million people are not eligible for statutory sick pay. So that's just under 2 million workers on low income who don't qualify because they earn less than the £118 a week on average. And then there are 5 million self-employed people who don't qualify either. Now, those on low pay are some of the people who will be hit hardest by the crisis. Many work in retail, hospitality and leisure, and we're also hearing of people being laid off in these sectors. Others will be concerned that their jobs may be at risk, and these anxieties could also make them more likely to carry on working even if they are unwell. There are nearly 1 million people on zero-hour contracts. An analysis by the TUC found that the earnings of around a third of them do not meet the threshold for statutory sick pay, compared to 6% of permanent employees, and women figure highly in the numbers of on zero-hour contracts, and around 70% of the women who would benefit from the overall, around 70% of workers who would benefit from the removal of the threshold are women. A government consultation published last year highlighted that workers who do not earn enough to qualify for statutory sick pay may be working when unwell. It said that the government believed that there was a case to extend eligibility for statutory sick pay to people earning less than the threshold. So will the government now extend statutory sick pay to all workers, including those on low pay? Along with the just under 2 million whose earnings are too low to qualify, there are others on low income in the gig economy who are not eligible because they're classified as self-employed. These include care workers, cleaners and delivery drivers, the very people who we will be depending on to an even greater degree than usual over the coming weeks and months, as people have to self-isolate in greater numbers. My honourable friend, the member for Dulwich and West Norwood, has rightly highlighted in a letter to the government signed by 100 colleagues that while NHS England has issued guidance advising trusts to give full sick pay to staff who have to self-isolate because of the disease, care workers on zero-hour contracts will not be protected. Now, they make up a quarter of the social care workforce. Will the government ensure that they also qualify for full sick pay? In the case of delivery drivers, the GMB has worked with Hermes to agree on a fund to protect the income of drivers who fall sick who have to self-isolate. But there are other examples of companies offering derisory payments or even requiring drivers to continue to meet the cost of renting vans even while they receive sick pay. It shouldn't need emphasising how important it is that people in occupations going from one house to another should not go on working when unwell. We depend on people like carers and drivers. The government has a responsibility to protect them if they're unable to work because of the outbreak. There is also a case to extend statutory sick pay to the self-employed more generally, as the Irish government has done. Many people who are disabled, who have been ill, for example, choose self-employment because of the flexibility that it can give them to choose hours that are manageable. However, they also may be now more vulnerable to the virus. The level of statutory sick pay is far too low at only £94.25 a week, so that even those who do qualify for it are likely to struggle to keep on top of even basic household bills. Average weekly earnings are currently £512, meaning that the average worker who has to self-isolate for 14 days will see their income fall by over £850 during that time.
I will thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and I wonder if she's aware that research that the Institute for the Future of Work have undertaken absolutely backs up everything she's saying about putting that statutory floor into place so that people are able to economically contribute when it is right for them to do so, and that there is much more resilience within the general population, and they have more ability to work when they are fit to do so when that kind of measure is in place.
The Honourable Lady makes a really excellent point, and I thank her for it. Many workers on low pay are unlikely to have savings to fall back on either. 48% of workers in a recent YouGov survey said they wouldn't be able to cover their rent or mortgage and other living expenses if they had to take 2 weeks off work at the current statutory sick pay rate. European Committee of Social Rights found in January of 2018 that statutory sick pay and social protections for the unemployed, sick and self-employed people in the UK were manifestly inadequate. A worker in the UK on the national minimum wage who has to self-isolate will receive less than a third what they would in Germany and less than half the level in Sweden or the Netherlands. The level of statutory sick pay is also set lower than the national living wage, which the government said in the budget it wants to increase. So will the government raise statutory sick pay to at least the level of the real living wage so that people are not pushed into poverty by doing the right thing? The government's approach has been to say people on low income who are not eligible for statutory sick pay can claim universal credit or new style ESA. That is not the answer. Universal credit acts as a vehicle for cuts, and the level of support is simply too low. The 4-year benefits freeze will only come to an end in April, and as a result, families living in poverty have been left £560 a year worse off on average. So will the government raise the level of social security payments in order to build resilience in people facing the virus? The 5-week wait for payment of universal credit means there will remain a risk that people will go on working when unwell. The government says people can request an advance, but advances are loans that have to be paid back, often on top of other debts built up during that period. So will the government commit to ending the 5-week wait, and will they change the loan into non-repayable advance? The truth is that people have often have to rely on food banks to survive, as well as advances during the first 5 weeks, and often after that as deductions are made from their universal credit when it finally does arrive. However, there's reports that panic buying by the public is leading to food banks running short. People using food banks can't afford to stock up and so disadvantaged still further. The government should be taking measures to protect people in poverty in the current situation. Will the government immediately suspend deductions from Social Security for anyone who becomes ill or is forced to self-isolate, and consider suspending them for all other claimants? Will the government suspend work search requirements for anyone directly affected by the virus? And will the government suspend all sanctions? In the budget, the Chancellor also suggested that some people who become ill but don't qualify for statutory sick pay could claim New Style ESA. That's £73.10 a week, even lower than statutory sick pay. Someone who is ill as a result of the coronavirus or for any other reason should not be pushed into poverty and left worrying about how they will cope financially in addition. So will the government raise the level of New Style ESA payments? Even to get that, someone has to have built up a contribution record over the past 2 years, which people in insecure work in particular may find difficult to do. The government announced it was temporarily suspending face-to-face assessments for sickness and disability benefits. That is welcome as far as it goes, and we've been highlighting the major problems with the way that assessments are carried out on this side of the House for a long time. But the government has said that it would be replaced by telephone or paper-based assessments. That could risk increasing pressure on GPs at a time when they are already overrun. So can the government tell us clearly how assessments will be carried out during the current outbreak? Media reporting of the virus highlighted that most at risk had underlying health conditions. What is the government's response, therefore, to Mind's call for all reassessments to be suspended to give people security of income at this time? What action will the Secretary of State take to protect people who care for a loved one who was already ill or disabled before the crisis began? Neither person may be directly affected by the virus, but attending a job centre could leave the carer at greater risk of contracting the virus. The truth is that Social Security changes aimed solely at people who are self-isolating or ill will not be enough. There will be other people affected by the crisis. The government has said it will suspend the minimum income floor in universal credit for self-employed people directly affected. Will it also suspend the minimum income floor for all workers, given that many will be affected as a result of the crisis and the impact on the economy? The demands on DWP will be considerable, and the government's own staff may be forced to self-isolate or take time off due to illness as a result of the outcome. So we would like to ask what the government is going to do to ensure that the service can continue. We're calling on the government to do all it can to introduce a form of robust and generous and comprehensive income protection for those whose hours may be cut or asked to take unpaid leave because of the impact of the crisis. In some cases, that will be because of a fall of customers, but if schools have to close at some point, there will also be parents who are not ill and do not have to self-isolate, but who are unable to go on working, at least full-time. The Danish government has just announced a scheme that would involve it paying 75% of people's wages in that situation, and businesses the remaining 25%. A similar scheme successfully limited redundancies in Germany during the financial crisis.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and the excellent comments she's making. I have been told that a major international fast food chain has told its employees that if a branch has to close because of either infection, being quiet or government action, then its employees will only get statutory sick pay and those on 0-hour contracts will get nothing. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that that will not only make it harder for them to do employees to do the right thing, but it is exploitative behaviour on the part of the employers and must be condemned and stopped?
Friend makes a really important point, and she's highlighting the vulnerability of people in insecure work who don't have sufficient level, and also the levels of statutory sick pay which aren't enough to cover people during this crisis.
She was making such a powerful speech, but may I just echo the point she was making about Denmark? And my understanding is that both the French and Italian governments are looking to introduce exactly the same thing, and that is to support workers' pay, those who are laid off, and being paid directly to the company to ensure those employees can be retained by the businesses and the businesses kept alive as well.
Honourable friend makes a really important point, and in fact we are working, the Labour Party is working with the TUC and others on looking through a package of measures, looking at the Danish model in particular. We want to see reassurance to people that they will not lose their jobs and their income, so that they can go on spending, which will prevent a sharp fall in demand. And it would also ease business confidence as firms would see government take part of their wage bill. It's an approach that employs employers, trade unions and government working together to preserve jobs and protect people from governments. We're calling on the government to explore these options. On this side of the House, we're prepared to work in partnership to make that happen. In conclusion, there is a real danger that those already pushed to the margin of our society will be worst affected by this crisis, and those who are struggling on low income, who are disabled, and those who are unable to work will be particularly badly affected. As I've mentioned, we are working with the TUC and others to bring forward a range of measures to extend and raise statutory sick pay, abolish the 5-week wait and sanctions, and provide income and wage support along the lines of the Danish model. We would also ask to join in discussions with the Prime Minister for emergency UBI. We need leadership from government to ensure that everyone is protected if they fall ill, are faced to self-isolate, or to see their jobs at risk or face unemployment. More than ever, we need leadership and policies that reflect the responsibility that we all have for one another.
The question is, as on the order paper, Minister Justin Tomlinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are in extraordinary times. The coronavirus pandemic is the most serious...